The threads of fate are not woven, they are scarred into the fabric of reality. They are the memory of a symphony that ended in a scream. We, the Aeldari, are the echoes of that final, terrible note. Before the prison of our path, there was an empire that danced with stars. Our minds were oceans deep and boundless, capable of shaping reality, with but a thought of composing sonatas in the heart of a nebula and carving sculptures from the moments between seconds. The galaxy was our canvas, and our emotions were the vibrant, untamed colors with which we painted our existence. We knew no limits, for we believed ourselves to be gods, and in our hubris we became the architects of our own hell. Our cities were not built, but grown from the psychoreceptive crystal of wraithbone great spires of light and music that pierced the heavens of 1,000 worlds. We lived for millennia, each moment an opportunity for new sensation, new art, new knowledge. But the boundless ocean of our spirit had no shore. The pursuit of sensation became the worship of sensation. The quest for beauty twisted into a lust for the grotesque. The celebration of life devolved into the meticulous artistry of death. Every emotion, once a gentle stream, became a raging, uncontrollable torrent, carving canyons of depravity into our collective soul. We sought to feel everything, and in doing so, we hollowed ourselves out, creating a vacuum of spiritual need. From the deepest currents of the Imperium, something listened. The psychic maelstrom of our unchecked passions, our insatiable desires, our arrogance and our agony began to coalesce. It was a cancer in the dimension of souls, a tumor fed by 1 trillion years of Aeldari excess. We were so consumed by our own inner worlds that we did not notice the reflection staring back at us from the abyss, its features our own twisted into a mask of perfect ultimate desire. Then came the scream. It was not a sound that travels through the air. It was a psychic detonation that ripped through the very essence of our race, the birth throe of the entity our folly had conceived. Slaanesh, she who thirsts, the prince of pleasure, the great enemy. The scream was the moment of its awakening, a cataclysmic psychic shockwave that snuffed out the souls of 90% of our people in a single eternal instant. Trillions upon trillions of minds consumed, devoured, becoming nothing more than the first taste of an infinite hunger. Their spirits were not merely extinguished, they were inverted, their joy turned to eternal torment, their love to exquisite pain, their artistic genius to the endless creation of their own damnation within the gut of the newborn god. That scream has never ended. For us, the survivors, the scattered remnants afloat on our world ships, it is the eternal background radiation of our existence. It is the tinnitus of the soul. We hear it in the silence between heartbeats. We feel it in the tremors of our hands when we reach for another. It is the ghost on the edge of our vision, the chilling whisper that promises freedom in the guise of damnation. Every Aeldari child is born into this echo, their soul already carrying the scar of a wound that killed their ancestors. To feel too deeply, to love too passionately, to create too freely, is to amplify that scream, to offer a beacon to the one who is always, always listening. And so we devised our salvation, a salvation that is also a cage, the path. Asuryan the Phoenix King taught us this. To survive, we must deny the very essence of what made us great. We must become masters of denial, artisans of austerity. Each Aeldari must choose a single facet of their being and dedicate themselves to it utterly, while allowing all other aspects to atrophy. The path of the artisan, the path of the warrior, the path of the seer, the path of the mariner, the path of the dreamer, each is a set of self-imposed shackles, a meticulously constructed prison for the mind. We walk these paths not for fulfillment, but for focus. We chain our passions to a single narrow purpose, lest they run wild and call our doom down upon us once more. The path is a spiritual tourniquet tightened to the point of agony to stop our souls from bleeding out into the warp. It is a lifetime spent staring at a single stone, so that we may never again gaze into the abyss. It is the discipline that has kept us alive, and the discipline that has bled the life from us. We are the wardens of our own souls, and the sentence is eternal. This is our legacy. This is the suffocating price of survival. We do not live. We endure each step a carefully measured defiance against the siren call of damnation. The light within the craft world is not the harsh glare of a star, but a gentle pearlescent luminescence that breathes from the wraithbone walls themselves. It is a light that seems to carry the weight of memory, illuminating corridors that curve like the inside of a seashell and domes that hold captive constellations. Here on Bieltan, the air itself hums with a disciplined energy, a silent testament to the constant collective effort of will that keeps their vessel alive and their souls shielded. There are no loud noises, only the soft, slippered footfalls on polished floors, the distant melancholic song of a spirit seer, communing with the dead, and the rhythmic pulse of the infinity circuit, the very heart of their world. In the heart of the dome of Azurian, a young Aeldari stood among others of her generation. Her name was Lyraela. She was young by the standards of her people, barely into her 2nd century. Yet her eyes, the color of amethysts, held the ancient sorrow that was her birthright. Today was the day of her choosing, the day she would voluntarily step into the cage that would define the rest of her life. The ceremony was one of profound solemnity, devoid of celebration. Before her and the others stood a council of seers, their faces hidden behind impassive masks, their voices a harmonized whisper that seemed to emanate from the air itself. "You are the children of the fall," the lead seer intoned, the words echoing not in their ears, but directly within their minds. "You are born into a war that was lost before you were conceived. Your very soul is a prize sought by the great enemy. Today, you do not choose a profession. You do not choose a passion. You choose your armor. You choose your discipline. You choose the walls of the fortress within which your spirit will shelter. Look upon the paths. They are not roads to glory, but bulwarks against damnation. Choose wisely, for a single misstep is an eternity of torment." Glyphs of light shimmered in the air before them, each one a stark, elegant representation of a path. The rune of the warrior. A stylized sword pulsed with contained violence. The rune of the seer, an intricate eye seemed to gaze into 1,000 futures at once. The rune of the mariner, a flowing wave, spoke of lonely voyages through the void. Lyraela's gaze, however, was drawn to a simpler symbol, the delicate, spiraling form of a nascent fern, the rune of the artisan. To create, to bring form from the formless, to mend what was broken. It seemed the most peaceful, the most distant from the rage and the madness that had consumed their ancestors. It felt safe. When her name was called, she stepped forward, her voice a soft but clear chime in the vast hall. "I choose the path of the artisan." There was no applause, only a silent collective nod of acceptance. She was led from the great dome into the quieter sector of the craft world to the shrine of shaping. Here the air smelled of ionized dust and cooling crystal. An ancient Aeldari awaited her, his face a web of fine lines, his hands stained with the dust of precious metals. He did not smile. "I am Veldorian," he said, his voice like the slow grinding of stone. "I will be your guide on this path. Forget all you thought you knew of creation. You are not here to express what is within you. That is the way of the fall." He led her to a simple workbench, upon which sat a lump of grey, psycho-receptive clay. Our ancestors poured their souls into their work. Their every fleeting joy, their every simmering rage, their every secret desire was given form. Their art screamed their identity into the void. The void answered. Veldorian placed his ancient hands over Lyraela's. His touch was cold and dry. "On this path you will learn to silence yourself. The forms you create are not yours. They are ancient, perfect patterns of stability and order. You are merely the tool that gives them substance. Your hands must move with a will that is not your own. Your mind must be a calm, reflective pool, not a stormy sea. You will learn to sculpt, to paint, to weave not as an act of creation, but as an act of meditation. It is a discipline of the hand to quiet the heart. He gestured to the lump of clay. Your first lesson is not to create, but to replicate. Before you is the sphere of stillness. It has no meaning. It evokes no emotion. It is perfect in its lack of ambition. You will spend the next cycle learning to replicate it flawlessly. You will feel the urge to improve it, to add a flourish, to make it uniquely yours. You must crush this urge. It is the voice of pride, and pride is the first whisper of the tempter. Here perfection is not beauty, but the absolute absence of self. Now begin. He left her there alone in the silent chamber. Lyraela stared at the simple clay. Her heart, which had moments ago felt a flicker of hope, for a life of quiet creation, now felt the cold, hard reality of the path. This was not a canvas for her soul. It was a tomb for it. She picked up a shaping tool, its metallic surface cool against her skin, and began the first of countless movements, each one a small death to the artist she might have been. The cycles turned into seasons, and the seasons into years. Lyraela's hands became extensions of the path's will. She mastered the sphere of stillness, her versions indistinguishable from the ancient prototype. She wove the tapestry of unwavering lines, its threads perfectly parallel, a monument to monotony. She painted the glyphs of stasis, each brush stroke a perfect negation of emotion. To her tutors she was a model student. She had embraced the discipline, built the walls of her mental fortress, high and bricked over the windows of her soul. But in the crushing silence of her own mind, a seed of rebellion was taking root. It was not a desire for chaos, but a thirst for meaning. The path taught control, but her soul, the ancient, vibrant soul of the Aeldari, yearned to feel. It began subtly. A fascination with the way the light refracted through a raw crystal before it was cut into a soul gem. The intricate, unplanned patterns in a block of wood before it was sanded into sterile smoothness. She saw a galaxy of beauty in the raw materials, a beauty that was systematically purged by the very discipline she was meant to uphold. The control she had mastered started to feel not like a shield, but like a shroud. The desire began to burn within her, not to express herself, but to give voice to the silent, aching beauty of the universe that the path demanded she ignore. It was a dangerous distinction, a justification her mind crafted in the lonely hours. Under the pretense of advanced meditation, she began to sequester herself away in a disused chamber deep within the shrine. She had found a piece of raw, unblemished wraithbone, one that resonated with a faint, sorrowful hum. And in the secret dark she began to work. Her tools, once instruments of repression, became instruments of release. The disciplines she had learned were not abandoned, but subverted. The precision of the path was now used to carve a line of exquisite, heart-breaking grace. The focus she had cultivated was now poured into a form that was the antithesis of stillness. She was sculpting a figure, not a hero nor a god. It was the last tear of Isha, the embodiment of their race's sorrow. A slender, androgynous figure, kneeling, head bowed, one hand outstretched, not in begging, but in a gesture of release. A single tear carved from a captured star crystal was poised to fall from its fingertip. The genius of the work was in its subtlety. There was no overt anguish, no screaming mouth or clenched fists. All the grief of a fallen empire, all the sorrow of a billion lost souls was contained in the curve of its spine, the tension in its neck, the gentle defeat in its hand. It was beautiful. It was tragically, magnificently, dangerously beautiful. To look upon it was to feel the weight of their history settle upon your own soul, to share in a grief so profound it was almost ecstatic. As she worked, she felt a rapturous joy, a connection to her creation that was intoxicating. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, terribly alive. The psychic resonance of such a creation could not go unnoticed forever. One cycle, as she was polishing the final perfect curve of the figure's shoulder, the door to her secret chamber slid open. Master Aeldari stood there. He did not speak. His ancient eyes widened, and the color drained from his face. It was not anger that radiated from him, but a deep, primal horror. He took an involuntary step back, as if the statue itself was a predator coiled to strike. "By the thrones of the gods? What have you done?" He finally whispered, his voice trembling. He walked forward slowly, his gaze locked on the sculpture, refusing to look at Lyraela. "You think you have created beauty. You have created a beacon. You have crafted a key and placed it in the lock of your own soul, inviting the beast to turn it. It is only sorrow, Master Lyraela," stammered the ecstatic trance of creation shattering. "Only sorrow?" Aeldari's voice was sharp with terror. "Sorrow is a flavor. Joy is a flavor. Perfection is the most seductive flavor of all. She who thirsts is not merely a god of pain and pleasure. It is the god of intensity, the god of the sublime, the god of the masterpiece that consumes its creator. You have striven for perfection, and in doing so you have whispered its name across the warp." He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You must understand. Come." He led her from the room, down corridors she had never seen, to a circular vault door, sealed with runes of warding. He placed his palm upon it, chanting a long, complex code of denial, and the great door ground open. The air inside was cold and felt psychically sticky. Within the chamber were dozens of plinths, each holding an artwork. Lyraela gasped. One was a flute carved of bone that seemed to weep a black ichor. Another was a painting of a forest whose trees had faces frozen in silent screams. A harp stood in the center, its strings made of shimmering silver nerves that twitched faintly. This, Aeldari said, pointing to the harp, was crafted by Aeldari. He sought to capture the music of the spheres. He believed he had. For a time, his music was the most beautiful thing in the craft world. Then those who listened too long began to sicken. The notes began to change reality. Aeldari is now a permanent resident of the Dome of the Dreamers, his mind lost in a symphony of horrors only he can hear. His hands had to be severed. He gestured to a shimmering cloak. Woven by Miriel. She wanted to capture the exact color of twilight in the threads. She succeeded. The cloak now shows you the moment of your own death when you look at it. Miriel saw her own and walked into the void without a spacesuit. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. Every artist who falls does not begin by embracing depravity. They begin by chasing the perfect note, the perfect color, the perfect form. They begin, Lyraela, exactly as you have. They pour their passion into their work, and that passion creates a resonance, a harmonic that the great enemy can hear. The work becomes a conduit and the artist a gateway. The full soul-crushing weight of his words fell upon Lyraela. The pride she had felt, the joy, the transcendent connection to her art, it was all the sweet bait on a hook of damnation. They returned to her secret chamber. The statue of the last tear of Isha seemed to mock her, now its sorrowful beauty a seductive lie. She saw the trap in its perfect lines. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she knew it would destroy her. With a cry that was half sob, half shout, she seized a heavy calibration mallet from a workbench. Before Aeldari could stop her, she brought it down upon her own creation. The sound of the perfect wraithbone shattering was like a scream. She struck it again and again, the crystal tear flying off into a corner, the graceful form reduced to a pile of glittering shards and dust. Each blow was a physical agony, a murder of a part of her own soul. When it was done, she fell to her knees, covered in the dust of her masterpiece, shaking uncontrollably. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, she rose and faced her horrified master, her face a mask of terrible resolve. "I cannot walk this path," she said, her voice hollow. "The quiet places are not safe for me. The temptation to create meaning is too strong. I need a discipline not of the hand but of the sword. I need a path where there is no room for beauty, no place for sorrow, only the purity of a single focused act. I must learn to destroy." The process of leaving a path is not a simple departure. It is an exorcism. Lyraela was brought to a chamber of undoing, a place of stark white wraithbone that seemed to absorb all sound and color. She knelt on a floor cold as a tombstone, while a trio of spirit seers, their faces veiled, circled her, their chanting a low, monotonous drone. This was the rite of cleansing, a psychic scouring designed to bury the person she had been, so that a new one could be built upon the foundations. "The hand that shaped the clay is unmade," they chanted, and a wave of psychic cold washed over Lyraela's hands, leaving them feeling numb, alien, no longer the vessels of a creator's will. The intimate knowledge of form and texture, the instinct for the perfect line, all of it was pushed down, locked away in a deep vault of her mind. The eye that saw beauty in the stone is veiled, they intoned, and the world seemed to lose a degree of its vibrancy. The subtle harmonies of color and shadow that she had been trained to perceive were muted, the memories of her secret sculpture fading from a vibrant, painful reality into a gray academic fact. "The heart that knew the passion of creation is stilled," they whispered in unison, and this was the cruelest cut. They did not erase the memory of the ecstasy she had felt while creating her masterpiece. They severed the emotional connection to it. She could recall the event, but the intoxicating feeling was gone, replaced by a hollow echo, a clinical acknowledgement of a past era. It was a process of voluntary soul death, a self-inflicted amputation to prevent the spread of a spiritual gangrene. When she rose, she felt lighter, but also terrifyingly empty, a vessel scrubbed clean, waiting to be filled with a new, harsher purpose. Her new home was the shrine of the howling banshees, and it was a world away from the silent, contemplative halls of the artisans. Here the air crackled. It smelled of ozone from active power blades and the metallic tang of polished armor. The architecture was aggressive, full of sharp, soaring angles that spoke of blades and velocity. The silence was replaced by the constant rhythmic hiss and clash of training swords, the percussive thud of bodies hitting training mats, and the occasional terrifying shriek of a battle scream being perfected in a psychically dampened chamber. She was brought before the shrine's exarch, a figure named Calith. The exarch was encased in bone-white armor that had been her skin for centuries. It was impossible to tell where the Aeldari ended and the war construct began. She was no longer a person. She was an archetype, a living embodiment of the warrior aspect of their god of war. The exarch's voice, filtered through the snarling grill of her helmet, was a razor-sharp whisper. "So the artisan seeks a new medium." Kylith stated not as a question, but as a pronouncement. She circled Lyraela, her movements fluid and predatory. "You came here believing you need to destroy your emotions. You are wrong. An artist who feels nothing creates nothing of worth. A warrior who feels nothing is merely a machine, and machines can be broken. We do not destroy emotion here. We purify it. We weaponize it." The exarch stopped directly in front of Lyraela, her masked face inches away. "That deep well of sorrow you carry, the grief of our people that you tried to shape into stone, we will give it a voice of razors. That flicker of passion you felt, the one that nearly damned you, we will hone it into the killing edge of a blade. Every frustration, every fear, every lingering desire you possess will be stripped of its context and reforged into a single, perfect, focused instrument of death, your scream. On the path of the artisan, you were taught to be silent. Here you will learn that a voice properly focused is the most devastating weapon of all. Lyraela's new life was a crucible of pain and exhaustion. The quiet meditation was replaced by grueling physical drills that pushed her body to the precipice of its endurance and beyond. The slow, meticulous work with her hands was replaced by the blindingly fast caters of the power sword movements practiced 10,000 times until her muscles acted without thought. Her body, once a simple vessel for her mind, was now the primary focus of her discipline. But the core of her training was the Banshee Scream. In soundproofed cells, she was taught to reach into the hollowed-out spaces within her, into the locked vaults where her old passions lay dormant, and to pull them forth. Not to feel them, but to use them as raw fuel. Her first attempts were choked, pitiful things, the screams of a victim. Calith offered no sympathy. "Your grief is pathetic," the Exarch's voice would boom through the chamber's speakers. "Give it fangs. Your rage is unfocused. Give it a target." Slowly, painfully, Lyraela learned. She learned to take the memory of her shattered statue and turn it not into sadness, but into a piercing note of absolute loss that could deafen an opponent. She learned to take her fear of Slaanesh and shape it into a psychosonic wave of pure terror that could freeze a lesser being's heart. Her emotions were no longer her own. They were ammunition. The chapter of her life as an artist closed on the day she stood before a crystalline target etched with the face of a laughing human. Taking a deep, controlled breath, she unleashed the scream. It was not a sound of rage or pain. It was a perfect engineered wave of sonic violence, a pure and focused expression of martial will. The crystal target didn't just break, it sublimated into a cloud of fine dust. Standing in the ringing silence that followed her throat roar, her body trembling with exertion, Lyraela felt the cold, clean certainty of her new path. The vessel was filled. The artist was dead. The warrior was born. The path of the warrior was not paved with stone, but with pain. Lyraela's existence was stripped down to 3 fundamentals: exhaustion, discipline, and the cold, hard song of the blade. The shrine of the howling banshees did not train soldiers. It forged living weapons, and the process was merciless. Her days began before the craft world's internal light had brightened to its dawn cycle, and ended long after it had dimmed to dusk. Every moment was a test, a relentless honing of the flesh to achieve an impossible standard of perfection. The training arenas were called the Fields of Arsa, vast chambers, where the environment could be manipulated at the whim of the Exarch. 1 hour Lyraela and her sisters would be practicing their killing dance on a floor of shifting, treacherous sand. The next, the artificial gravity would be tripled mid-cutter, forcing their bodies to compensate with inhuman strength and balance, or have their bones shattered. They fought against holographic phantoms, against semi-sentient combat servitors, and most brutally against each other. In these duels there was no room for mercy or hesitation. A strike that was a hair's breadth too slow was met with the searing pain of a training blade's energy field, a lesson that carved itself into nerve and muscle alike. Exarch Calith's voice was a constant presence, a merciless goad driving them beyond their limits. "Your body is not you," she would rasp over the shrine's communicators as they ran for hours on end, their lungs burning. "It is a vessel. You must purge it of weakness, of fatigue, of the desire for rest. It is a sword of flesh and bone, and you must sharpen it until it can cut the wind." Lyraela welcomed the agony. The screaming protest of her muscles was a welcome noise that drowned out the lingering whispers of her past. The sharp, clean focus required to parry a blow left no room for the seductive complexities of art, or the dangerous allure of emotion. Her mind, once a landscape of creative yearning, was becoming a Spartan fortress, its walls built of pain, and its only occupant a cold, clear sense of purpose. She was learning the true meaning of the warrior's path, to find peace in the promise of violence, to find stillness in the heart of a perfect, lethal motion. This was a discipline that left no cracks through which the whispers of the great enemy could enter. After what seemed like an eternity of this physical crucible, Laerela and the other initiates were deemed ready for the next rite of passage, the donning of the war mask. They were brought to the shrine's inner sanctum, a circular chamber, whose walls were lined with the masks of fallen banshees, each one a silent, snarling testament to centuries of war. In the center of the room, on an altar of polished obsidian, lay their own masks, pristine and impersonal. "This is not a helmet, Exarch." Calith's voice echoed in the sanctum, softer now, laced with a chilling reverence. "It is not merely for protection. Any artisan can craft armor. This is a key. It will unlock the part of your soul that belongs to Cain, our god of war. When you wear this mask, you will cease to be Laerela or Elara or Shael. You will become the Banshee. Your petty fears, your private memories, your individual hopes, they are a liability in battle. The war mask will silence them. It will grant you the clarity of the predator, the focus of the executioner. It will strip away the self and leave only the warrior." Laerela knelt before the altar and took the mask in her hands. It was heavier than it looked, crafted from gleaming wraithbone, its features locked in a silent, stylized shriek. The long, vibrant crest of hair attached to it felt like a living thing. With a deep breath, she raised it to her face. The moment the mask sealed, the world changed. The sounds of the chamber were instantly muted, replaced by the soft hum of the helmet's internal systems. The optical display highlighted the other initiates, the altar, the Exarch tagging them with tactical data range, status, potential threat level. But the true transformation was internal. A profound psychic shift washed over her. The anxious, striving consciousness of Laerela did not vanish, but it receded as if she were now a passenger in her own body. A new presence rose to take the controls, a cold, ancient, and utterly ruthless intelligence. It was the warrior aspect, the shard of Cain. It felt no fear. It felt no doubt. It looked at her sisters and saw not comrades, but fellow instruments in an orchestra of death. It looked at her own hands and saw only their potential to kill. The world was no longer a place of beauty or sorrow. It was a matrix of angles, trajectories, and vulnerabilities. The Exarch's voice came through the internal communicator, crisp and clear. "You are one. Rise." Laerela rose, and 13 other figures rose with her. They were no longer individuals. They were a single unit, their movements already synchronized with an eerie precision. They drew their power swords, and the hum of 16 blades became a single unified chorus. As one, they began a complex battle kata, a deadly ballet of interwoven blades. Laerela the artisan would have marveled at the terrifying beauty of the dance. Laerela the initiate would have struggled to keep up. But the Banshee, the entity now wearing her body, simply moved a perfect cog in a perfect killing machine. She had found a silence more profound than any meditation, a purpose more absolute than any art. She had silenced her soul by surrendering it to the god of the sword. Theory and reality are two different worlds. The forges of the shrine temper skill, but only the true flames of war can temper a soul. The first deployment for Laerela and her Banshee sisters was a lightning strike on an orc outpost on a desolate rust-bucket moon. The moon was a nightmare of corroded iron, noxious smoke, and the ceaseless brutish roar of greenskins, an insult to everything the Aeldari held sacred. They moved like ghosts. Their strike craft, a vampire raider, sliced through the polluted atmosphere without a sound, its hull shifting colors to match the sickly brown sky. Inside, no one spoke a word. The Banshees stood poised, their power swords dormant, their minds shielded by the iron will of their war masks. Laerela felt a cold stillness within her. The person of Laerela was merely an observer huddled in a corner of her own mind, while the Banshee entity, cool and focused, piloted her body with terrifying efficiency. There was no fear, no anxiety, only a cold anticipation for the slaughter to come. When the Raiders' assault ramp opened, it did so not with a mechanical hiss, but with perfect silence. The first thing to exit the craft was not a warrior, but a wave of psychic pressure. And then they struck. The chaos of the Orc camp was a perfect antithesis. The massive, crude and loud greenskins were yelling, fighting amongst themselves, and firing their weapons indiscriminately into the air. They were the embodiment of indiscipline, of raw, unchecked emotion. And the Banshees fell upon them like a crystal scalpel. The scene was surreal. 16 white figures moved through the battlefield with a lethal grace, a choreographed ballet of destruction. They did not run. They flowed, weaving around clumsy hails of bullets with an almost contemptuous ease. Their power swords hissed to life, carving through thick hides and makeshift armor, leaving trails of brilliant light and guttural bellows cut short. Lyraela saw a hulking orc turn towards her, its beady eyes wide with stupid surprise. It raised a massive chain axe, roaring a challenge. The Lyraela that was would have frozen in terror. The Banshee did not. Time seemed to slow. The warrior aspect within her analyzed everything. The angle of the axe swing, the imbalance in the orc's stance, the exposed vulnerability beneath its arm. And then she screamed. It was not a cry of fear. It was the Banshee scream honed over countless hours of practice. A pure psychosonic wave tuned to the perfect frequency to overload an enemy's nervous system. The shriek stopped the great orc in its tracks, its eyes rolling back in its head, its muscles spasming as its brain was assaulted by a weapon it could not comprehend. That moment of paralysis was all she needed. Lyraela flowed forward, dipping under its raised arm, her body moving with an efficiency she did not know she possessed. Her power sword drew a brilliant blue arc. There was no wasted motion. The blade sheared through thick hide muscle and bone with almost no resistance. The orc's head flew from its shoulders, its roar cut off mid-bellow. The massive body crashed to the ground with a wet thud. The Banshee within felt nothing. It was a task completed, an equation solved, a threat neutralized. It was already moving to the next target before the first body had hit the dirt. She fought like a white whirlwind, a perfect engine of death. Slice, dodge, scream, thrust. The movements flowed into one another, a song of the blade. But as the battle reached its crescendo, as blood and diesel fuel sprayed through the air, the observer inside the old Lyraela felt something. A spark. A savage exhilaration, a primal joy in the exercise of absolute dominance, in being the perfect storm in the heart of chaos. A deep part of her Aeldari blood, the legacy of her fallen ancestors, was becoming intoxicated by the perfection of violence. It was an exquisitely dangerous emotion. It was like the feeling she'd had creating her sculpture, but hotter, more primal. It was the call of excess. Instantly, her discipline forged in pain and renunciation clamped down. The Banshee entity within her sensed this unsanctioned emotional surge like a virus in the system. A psychic wall of ice slammed down, extinguishing the spark of exhilaration with merciless finality. The flare of emotion was crushed, caged, denied. There is no joy in the kill, only necessity. There is no elation, only focus. The shock of this self-censorship almost made her miss a beat. A stray bullet grazed her shoulder, scoring a black mark on her white armor. The pain was a sharp reminder. Discipline was not a passive state. It was a constant action, a relentless war fought within the landscape of the soul. The battle ended as quickly as it began. The Orc outpost fell silent, leaving only smoking corpses and the hiss of cooling power blades. Lyraela stood amidst the carnage, her breath even and controlled. She looked at her hands smeared with the black blood of her enemy. She had survived. Her discipline had held. but she had also tasted for a fleeting moment the terrible freedom it was designed to contain. And that temptation, she realized, was a far more terrifying monster than any green skin. War became the new rhythm of her life. Battle followed battle, a relentless drumbeat against the anvil of her soul. They fought against the treacherous Drukhari in the mirrored corridors of the webway, their grace a match for the cruelty of their kin. They purged bestial orcs from maiden worlds, their surgical strikes a stark contrast to the green-skin's brute force. They moved as a whisper of death against the lumbering armies of mankind. With each engagement, Lyrela became more adept, her movements more fluid, her battle scream a more potent instrument of death. She was a successful warrior, a credit to her shrine, and with every victory a part of her died. The change was insidious. It happened not in the heat of combat, but in the quiet moments between. When she walked the serene, spiraling corridors of the craft world, she found her eyes automatically tracking lines of sight, identifying potential ambush points, assessing the structural integrity of the Wraithbone arches. The gentle chiming music that flowed through the air was no longer beautiful. It was a tactical distraction. She began to find the peace of her home unnerving. Silence was no longer a state of contemplation, but an absence of threat, a prelude to violence. The warrior aspect, which should have receded when the war mask was removed, now lingered a permanent shadow behind her eyes. The moment of horrifying clarity came when she found herself in the Hall of Remembrance, a gallery that housed some of the few surviving artworks from before the fall. In her previous life, this place would have been a source of profound temptation and sorrow. Now she felt nothing. She looked upon a sculpture of breathtaking grace, a relic that had survived the birth of a god and the death of an empire, and her mind did not register its beauty. Instead, she analyzed its composition, its weight distribution, how best to shatter it. She looked at a tapestry woven with the light of dying stars, and saw only its potential as tactical cover. The artist within her, the woman who had once risked her soul for the sake of creation, was not just silent. She was nearly dead, its tombstone a warrior's discipline. This cold, alien logic inhabiting her own mind terrified her more than any enemy. She sought an audience with Exarch Calith, finding her not in the training cages, but in her personal sanctum. The chamber was as stark and Spartan as the Exarch herself. There was no art, no comfort, only weapon racks, maintenance tools, and polished trophies taken from fallen foes. It was a cell dedicated to the singular worship of war. The mask does not come off anymore, Lyrela said, her voice quiet but steady. Even when my face is bare, I see the world through its eyes. The warrior does not sleep. I fear I am losing my way, Exarch. The path has become all that I am. For a long moment, Calith was silent, the impassive snarl of her helmet offering no clue to her thoughts. Then, with a series of soft clicks, the Exarch reached up and removed her helmet. It was a gesture of profound intimacy and vulnerability one Lyrela had never witnessed. The face beneath was ancient, elegant, and bore the faint scars of 1,000 battles. But most unsettling were her eyes. They held no fire, no fury, only a vast glacial emptiness, a weariness that seemed older than the stars. You are not losing the path, child. Calith's voice was different without the filter, softer, but infinitely sadder. You are mastering it, and that is why you must leave it. Look at me. She gestured to her own face. This is the final destination on the path of the warrior. An Exarch is an Aeldari who has fought so long, so fiercely, that they have forgotten how to be anything else. I am trapped. The warrior aspect you borrow with your mask, it is my entire reality now. Calith is a name I barely remember. I am the Banshee. The armor you see is no longer something I wear. It is my skin, my bones. It cannot be removed. She held up a gauntleted hand. I am a living weapon, a ghost haunting its own war gear. My purpose is to teach, to lead in battle, and to stand as a warning to those like you. You have used this path to shield your soul. You have reforged your passions into a sword and used it to defend our people. You have done your duty. But the purpose of the path is to be a journey, not a destination. You must not become a monument to your own war. The Exarch's empty eyes fixed on Lyrela's, a silent, desperate plea within their depths. You feel the artist within you dying. Heed that feeling. It is the last part of you that remembers how to be anything other than this. Leave the shrine. Undergo the rite of cleansing. Find another path, any path that will teach you a different song. Do it now, while you still can. Walk this road any further, and the mask and your face will become one. And that is a fate I would not wish upon any of our kind. Lyrela left the sanctum, the Exarch's words echoing like a death knell in her mind. As she walked down a long, polished corridor, she caught her reflection in the gleaming wraithbone. For a terrifying, flickering instant, she did not see her own face looking back at her. She saw the snarling, soulless visage of the banshee mask, its empty eyes her own. She understood. To save the last vestiges of Lyrela, she would have to kill the warrior she had become. To leave the path of the warrior was a more violent undertaking than leaving the path of the artisan. The first cleansing had been a hollowing out, a removal of passion. This one was the caging of a beast. In the stark, white chamber of undoing, the Spirit Seer's chants were not of silencing but of binding. The hand that took a life shall now mend, they intoned, and Lyrela felt a psychic fire sear through her arms, not to numb them, but to chain the predatory instinct that resided in the muscle memory. The lightning-fast reflexes the killer's edge were not erased, but suppressed beneath layers of psychic wards. The voice that shattered stone shall now be silent, they chanted, and her throat felt as if it were being lined with cool, smooth glass, silencing the latent power of the banshee's scream. The heart that beat for war shall now serve the peace they concluded, and the cold, focused fury that had been her constant companion was banished, locked away. The process was agonizing, like forcing a limb back into a dislocated socket. She emerged not empty as before, but feeling caged within herself, the warrior aspect still present, but bound in metaphysical chains. Once again she stood in the dome of Asurion before the shimmering glyphs of the paths. This time she was not a hopeful youth, nor a desperate soul seeking refuge in violence. She was a veteran, weary and wary. Her gaze passed over the glyph of the seer, knowing its visions would be too close to the chaos she sought to escape. She ignored the glyph of the mariner, for the loneliness of the void was a different kind of abyss. She needed something else. Not a challenge, not an adventure, but a service. An anonymous, meticulous and silent duty. Her eyes settled on a humble, complex rune, a latticework of hexagons representing the core structure of Wraithbone. It was the symbol for the path of the technician, sometimes called the path of the Bone Singer's hand. They were the silent caretakers, the menders of the craft world's very body. It was a path with no glory, no passion, and no room for the self. It was perfect. Her new shrine was the craft world itself, not the inhabited domes and spires, but its deep, unseen veins. Her workplace was the silent, lonely service corridors that webbed through the superstructure places where the only light came from the faint internal glow of the Wraithbone and the focused beam of her own work lumen. The atmosphere was one of profound, ancient silence, broken only by the barely perceptible low-frequency hum of the ship's lifeblood. It was like working inside the skeleton of a sleeping god. Her master was a quiet, ancient Aeldari named Ithrin, who communicated more through gesture than through words. He taught her the new discipline. Her tools were no longer brushes or blades, but diagnostic resonators, microsealant applicators, and harmonic tuning forks. Her task was to maintain the living bone of their home, to find and seal the microscopic psychic fractures caused by millennia of travel through the warp, to polish the great energy conduits so that the craft world's power flowed unimpeded, to listen to the song of the Wraithbone and soothe the dissonant notes of stress and age. The work demanded a new and absolute form of discipline. It was a discipline of patience. She would spend an entire cycle meticulously sealing a single meter-long fracture that was no wider than a hair. It required absolute precision. A misapplication of the sealant or an incorrect harmonic vibration from her tuner could introduce a flaw far worse than the one she was mending, a weakness that might fester for centuries before causing a catastrophic failure. Above all, it demanded emotional nullity. The Wraithbone was psychoreceptive. Any strong emotion, frustration, impatience, pride in her work could be impressed upon it, tainting the structure. She had to become a calm, unfeeling instrument, a simple extension of the will to mend. The days blended into one another in the deep, humming dark. Laerela found a strange peace in the repetitive, impersonal nature of her work. She was deep inside the hull, tracing a massive, curving spar of wraithbone that formed one of the craft world's primary ribs. Her lumen cast a small pool of light, illuminating a network of infinitesimal stress cracks. With steady hands and a silent mind, she began her work applying the pearlescent sealant 1 millimeter at a time. The silence here was deeper than any she had known. It was not the tense, creative silence of the artisan's studio, nor the focused pre-combat silence of the warrior's sanctum. It was the vast, structural silence of existence itself. Here there was no beauty to tempt her passion, no enemy to ignite her rage. There was only the task, the quiet hum of her home, the slow, steady work of her hands. For the first time in centuries, Laerela felt not safe, not purposeful, but simply still. And for now, that stillness was a sanctuary. The path of the technician was a discipline of attunement. In the deep and silent places of the craft world, Laerela learned that wraithbone was more than just a building material. It was a psychic resonator, a living library of their people's history. Her tools were not merely for physical mending. They were focusing instruments that allowed her to commune with the structure, to feel the flow of energy as a palpable current, and to sense the stress points not as cracks, but as knots of psychic tension. The psychic potential within her, no longer channeled into the violence of a warrior or the passion of an artist, was recalibrating itself, learning a new, more subtle language. It was during this process that she first truly heard the great chorus. The low, constant hum of the craft world's core systems began to resolve in her mind. At first, it was just a faint impression, a feeling of being watched by a benevolent, silent crowd. But as her attunement grew, the impression gained texture. It became a soft, harmonious whisper, a sound like a million quiet breaths taken in unison. These were the voices of the dead, the spirits of countless Aeldari preserved within the crystal matrix of the Infinity Circuit. It was the soul of their world, a collective consciousness that offered a constant subliminal sense of stability and peace. Her master Ithran explained it was a sign of her progress. To hear the chorus was to be accepted by the spirit of the craft world, to become a part of its endless silent song. Her work led her deeper than ever before to a primary psychic nexus near the vessel's core. Here great trunk-like conduits of wraithbone converged, pulsing with a soft inner light, carrying the psychic lifeblood that powered their entire world. She was tasked with reinforcing a joint that was showing signs of millennia of stress. As she carefully applied a harmonic resonator to the conduit, a flicker of something unforeseen happened. A violent, aberrant stream of cosmic radiation, a stray eddy from a distant warp storm, struck the craft world. For a billionth of a second, the energy flow in the nexus before her surged beyond all imaginable limits. The result was catastrophic. A sharp crack, both physical and psychic, split the air. The harmonious, peaceful chorus of the Infinity Circuit shattered into a billion shrieking shards. The serene whispers of her ancestors became a deafening, insane cacophony of terror, pain, and confusion, a psychic storm of 1,000,000 souls crying out at once directly inside her skull. The conduit before her, once glowing with a soft, steady light, now bled a sickly violet energy from a new hairline fracture. A breach, a tiny, insignificant wound in the skin of their world, but one that led directly to its soul. And through the storm of screaming spirits, a new voice bled through. It was not Aeldari. It was melodic, seductive, and utterly profane, a silver needle of sound piercing the chaotic noise. It was the laughter of she who thirsts, a voice that slithered through the cracks in reality. "Hush now, little one." It whispered its words, coiling directly into the most secret, tired corners of her mind. It didn't offer crude temptations of pleasure or power. It offered something far more insidious, an end to her struggle. So much discipline, so much pain, such a heavy burden. Don't you wish to lay it down, to feel again? The song of the spirits is one of pain. My song is one of release. Let go. Let the walls crumble, just for a moment. Wouldn't it be wonderful to finally, truly be free? The psychic pressure was immense. The panicked screams of the Aeldari dead were a battering ram against her mental shields. The seductive whisper of the demon was a poison promising peace while trying to widen the breach to turn this tiny crack into a gaping wound through which it could pour its filth into the infinity circuit itself. Lyraela had no sword. She had no battle scream. Her only weapon was the absolute, unyielding stillness she had cultivated. With a monumental act of will, she pushed the cacophony of her ancestors to the background. She focused past the demon's song. She forced her mind into the state her work required, calm, empty, and utterly devoid of emotion. She was not a warrior fighting a monster. She was a technician repairing a fault. She raised her harmonic tuning fork. It was a tool of precision, not power. Striking it, she did not fight the chaotic noise with more noise. She introduced a single, perfect, unwavering note of pure order. She projected her will through the tool, not as a weapon, but as a command of mending. Her thoughts were not of defiance, but of structure, a perfect line, a flawless sphere, the concept of an unbroken surface. She was fighting the ultimate expression of chaotic sensation with its direct antithesis, the sheer unyielding boredom of perfect order. The seductive whisper recoiled, hissing. To a creature of infinite excess, this projection of pure, structured nullity was a burning agony. Slowly, painstakingly, as she held the perfect note of order in her mind, she guided the physical tools, coaxing the living wraithbone. The psychic energies of the material responded to her projection of calm. The hairline crack began to knit itself shut. The violet light receded. As the last sliver of the breach sealed, the demon's whisper was severed with a final, frustrated shriek. The insane screaming of the Aeldari spirits subsided the chaos, resolving back into the calm, harmonious hum of the chorus. Lyraela collapsed against the now stable conduit, her body trembling, her mind scoured by the psychic ordeal. The sanctuary of her quiet path had been violated. She now understood with chilling clarity that there was no path so humble, no duty so quiet that it was beyond the notice of the great enemy. It was always there, listening, waiting for the smallest crack in the prison of their discipline. And this harrowing encounter, this brush with the absolute abyss, had unknowingly awakened something deep within her, a potential she had never known she possessed. In the quiet aftermath of the incident, Lyraela was not the same. The healers pronounced her physically unharmed, but the scar on her soul was profound. The world felt louder. The gentle psychic hum of the infinity circuit was no longer a background whisper. It was a clear and constant chorus at the edge of her thoughts. But more than that, there were new, disorienting sensations. She would see a flicker of a maintenance tool slipping from a colleague's grasp a second before it actually fell. She would know the content of a question from her master Ethrin an instant before he spoke the words. Time itself seemed to have developed a subtle echo, a ghost of the immediate future that only she could perceive. This nascent, uncontrolled prescience was not a gift. It was a constant jarring distraction that threatened the absolute focus her path required. Her condition did not go unnoticed. The psychic shockwave from her battle of wills at the Nexus, followed by the emergence of her own untrained, powerful potential, was a flare in the Imperium that was clearly visible to those who knew how to look. The Farseers of Bieltan, their minds constantly adrift in the river of time, felt this new, turbulent eddy and turned their gaze upon her. A summons was issued, not a request, but a gentle, irresistible psychic pull. She was drawn to the dome of Crystal Seers, a place few Aeldari ever enter. If the rest of the craft world was like a pristine sculpture, the dome was a living diamond. Crystalline spires, impossibly thin, reached for a ceiling that swirled with the captured light of nebulas. The very walls were not solid, but seemed to be made of frozen time, ghostly, half-formed images of things that were and things that might yet be drifting and dissolving within their depths. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and the palpable crushing weight of immense psychic power held in a state of perfect, terrifying control. In the center of the dome, a council of Farseers awaited her. They sat unmoving upon crystalline thrones, their features obscured by the shimmering haze of their own power. They wore no war masks, for their discipline was so absolute, their own minds were the ultimate shield. Their leader, a venerable seer named Lyandon, whose psychic presence felt as ancient and deep as the void itself, addressed her. His voice was not a sound, but a thought that bloomed directly in her mind, calm, impossibly vast, and carrying the weight of 1,000 futures seen. "You have looked into the abyss," Lyandon's thought voice resonated within her. "And the abyss has stared back. In sealing the breach, you were forced to channel the raw power of the Imperium. The ordeal did not break you. Instead, it acted as a forge, awakening a power within your soul that has lain dormant for all your life. A power that is now a beacon," another Farseer continued the thought. "This potential, untrained and untamed, is a mortal danger to you and to us all. An uncontrolled mind is an open door, and the things that dwell in the great ocean are always knocking. You cannot return to your quiet path. Your very presence would taint the Wraithbone. Your mind is no longer a place of stillness." They were not chastising her. They were stating a fact with the detached clarity of physicians delivering a terminal diagnosis. But they were also offering the only possible cure. "There is only one path left for you now," Lyandon projected the thought laced with a profound gravity. "The one from which all other paths are born, and the one that is the most perilous. We invite you to walk the path of the seer." He showed her in a flash of terrifying understanding what this meant. He contrasted it with her life so far. "On the path of the artisan, the danger is from within. A failure of discipline leads to a flawed creation that can corrupt the soul. On the path of the warrior, the danger is external, and the discipline of violence is its shield. On the path of the technician, the danger is contamination, a breach in the walls that protect us." His next thought was the heaviest of all. "The path of the seer is different. Our arena is the Imperium itself. Our tool is the river of time. We do not shield ourselves from the warp. We immerse ourselves in its currents to divine the future. The raw essence of chaos is the very medium in which we must work. The great enemy you fought in the machine is not an invader we seek to repel. It is a predator whose hunting grounds we must navigate every single day. The final warning was delivered with the force of a physical blow, a psychic imprint of absolute, chilling certainty. The discipline required here is of a different order entirely. On your old paths, a mistake had consequences. A ruined sculpture, a lost life. On this path, a single stray thought, a flicker of fear, while viewing a possible battle, a surge of pride in correctly predicting a fortunate outcome, can become a seed that alters destiny. It can create a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. A mistake, little one, does not simply kill you. It can unmake a future. It can rewrite history for the worse. It can lead this entire world-ship to a destruction so complete that we will never have existed at all. The discipline is not merely to control yourself, but to control reality itself. There is no margin for error. Ever, Lyraela stood in the heart of that impossible place, surrounded by beings of immense power, and felt the true crushing weight of her existence. She had sought safety in quietude, focus in violence, and stillness in service. Each path had only led her to a more profound and inescapable danger. Now her own nature, the awakened power in her soul, was the greatest threat of all. She could not suppress it. She could not run from it. Looking at the shifting, ghostly futures swirling in the crystal walls around her, she understood, with grim final clarity. The only way forward was through. I accept she projected back her own thought, a tiny, determined flicker in the vast ocean of their consciousness. The path of the seer did not begin with grand visions of galactic destiny. It began in silence, in a chamber of absolute focus, with a handful of polished wraithbone runes. These were her new tools. Each one was cool to the touch, inscribed with a potent ancient symbol, the serpent of secret knowledge, the phoenix of rebirth, the black maw of utter doom. Farsia Lyandan explained that they were not instruments of fortune-telling. They were psychic anchors, focusing lenses that allowed a seer's mind to impose a sliver of order upon the infinite screaming chaos of possibility. That was the Imperium. The future is not a book to be read. Lyandan's thought voice echoed in her mind, calm and steady as a glacier. It is a raging ocean of what-ifs and maybes. To gaze into it unprotected is to be driven mad by its vastness. The runes are your lifeline. They will allow you to navigate the currents, to interpret the tides, and to return with your sanity intact. Her first lesson was to cast them. Following Lyandan's instruction, she focused her mind on a single simple intent: to see the state of the craft world's immediate well-being. She let the runes fall from her hand onto a cloth of black velvet. The moment they left her fingers, her consciousness was ripped from her body. She was adrift in the ocean. A terrifying, exhilarating, and overwhelming torrent of sensory data flooded her. She saw 1,000 images at once: a maintenance crew successfully repairing a solar sail, a young warrior falling in a training accident, a ship's patrol turning left instead of right. She heard 1,000,000 sounds: the laughter of children, the declaration of a hidden Drukhari raid, the quiet prayers of a spirit seer. She felt the collective emotions of her entire race, a vast sea of sorrow, pinpricked with tiny islands of disciplined calm and flickers of hope. It was too much. Her mind buckled under the sheer crushing weight of it all. Just as she felt her consciousness begin to fray, the runes on the cloth below became blazing points of light in the psychic storm. Anchors. Following Lyandan's guidance, she clung to their meaning, using their structure to filter the chaos. The maelstrom resolved into patterns, and the patterns were terrifying. She saw the myriad ways their world could end. She saw a fleet of rusted orc cruisers appearing from a freak warp jump, overwhelming their defenses with sheer brutal numbers. She saw the silent, creeping tendrils of a tyrannid hive fleet, a shadow that consumed all life. She saw the gilded warships of the Emperor of Mankind, their macro cannons turning the elegant spires of Biel-Tan to dust in a holy crusade. She saw futures where they were betrayed by their own kin, where a single miscalculation in the webway led them into the heart of a dying star, where a plague born of Nurgle turned the wraithbone to weeping, rotting flesh. For every single thread of fate that showed their survival, there were 1,000 that ended in absolute silent extinction. The burden of this knowledge was a physical agony. A wave of cosmic despair washed over her, the utter futility of their struggle laid bare. What was the point of their discipline, their sacrifice, if doom was lurking behind every possible choice, she felt her will begin to dissolve. Detached Lionden's thought voice cut through her despair, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. You are not a mourner for tragedies that have not yet occurred. You are a navigator. These are reefs and storms, nothing more. Acknowledge them, chart them, and steer our course away. Do not drown in the sea you are meant to chart. With his help, she pulled back, forcing the emotional horror away, leaving only the cold data. It was the hardest discipline she had ever had to learn. As she grew more adept, Liandon gave her a new task. The great fleets and invading hordes cast long shadows. We can see them coming. Search for the subtler threats. The poison in the cup. The dagger in the dark. Lyraela cast the runes again, her mind now a sharper instrument. She pushed her consciousness into the stream, filtering out the grand vistas of war and destruction. She searched for the threads of corruption, the small internal dangers. And then one thread pulled taut, singing with a terrible, beautiful clarity. The vision that engulfed her was not of war. It was of art. She was back in the shrine of shaping, seeing through the eyes of a young sculptor, his hands shaping a figure of such sublime beauty that it made her old creation seem like a child's toy. She felt the sculptor's illicit pride, a rapturous joy that was dangerously close to worship. The vision shifted. She was in the Banshee shrine watching a warrior complete a flawless killing stroke in a duel. She felt the warrior's surge of savage triumph, the thrill of her own martial perfection, and woven through these moments she heard a sound. It was not music but a psychic frequency, a high, silvery, seductive melody. This melody resonated with the artist's pride and the warrior's triumph, amplifying them, nourishing them, encouraging them. It was a song that whispered, "Yes, more. Feel this. This is what it means to be alive. Your discipline is a cage. Perfection is the key." It was a psychic virus targeting the very foundation of their society by making the path itself a vehicle for the sin of excess. The vision followed the melody to its source. She found herself in the roiling chaos of the warp, and there she saw it, a Slaaneshi demonetta. It was a creature of impossible grace and nightmarish beauty, its limbs long and slender, its eyes burning with malevolent ecstasy. It was not attacking the craft world. It was singing to it. Its voice was the melody, a siren's call of temptation, broadcast across the veil, a hook cast into their souls, patiently waiting for someone to bite. Lyraela ripped her mind back to reality, gasping in the cold air of the dome, the ghost of that terrible, beautiful melody still echoing in her thoughts. She looked at Liandon, her eyes wide with horror, and projected everything she had seen. The ancient Farseer's presence did not flicker. He showed no surprise, only a deep, grim acknowledgement. The enemy was at the gates, but it was not a gate of flesh and bone. It was the gate of the Aeldari soul. The vision was not a prophecy of a distant future. It was a diagnosis of a sickness that had already taken root. With her senses now attuned to the demonette's psychic song, Lyraela began to see the subtle signs of its corruption spreading through the craft world like a fever. The iron discipline of the path, the bedrock of their survival for 10,000 years, was beginning to show microscopic cracks. She walked through the shrine of shaping, the place of her first path, and the quiet halls felt different. There was a low hum of obsessive energy. She saw an artisan polishing a gemstone, his eyes wide with a feverish light, as he sought a level of perfection that bordered on the idolatrous. She saw a weaver working on a ceremonial banner, her hands adding tiny, almost imperceptible flourishes of sensuous curving lines that were not part of the ancient, rigid patterns. They were beautiful, but it was a beauty that felt disturbingly alive, personal, and proud. These were not the acts of disciplined meditation. They were acts of burgeoning passion, nurtured by the constant subliminal melody that whispered of the glory of the sublime. The infection was more pronounced in the shrine of the howling banshees. The controlled ferocity of their training duels had gained a harder, crueler edge. Lyraela watched two warriors spar, and their movements, while still graceful, were laced with a genuine savage joy. The killing blows in the simulations were delivered with an unnecessary vehemence. Their battle scream, meant to be a focused weapon, was now occasionally tinged with the red note of true rage, the silver note of ecstatic release. They were not just training their bodies. They were feeding an addiction to violence, mistaking the thrill of the fight for the purity of the path. The melody was teaching them to love the war, not the purpose it served. This subtle decay was everywhere. The discipline was not breaking. It was bending, warping under a constant gentle pressure. Lyraela knew that to fight the symptoms was futile. She had to strike at the source, in the deepest chamber of the Dome of Seers, under the watchful minds of Leandan and the council she prepared for a psychic battle. Her body entered a deep trance, but her mind, honed by her journey through 3 paths, became a focused point of will. Her mission was not to scry, but to hunt. Using the corrupting melody as a thread, she cast her consciousness out from the material shell of the craft world and plunged into the raw, roiling chaos of the Imperium. It was a terrifying voyage, navigating an ocean of pure emotion and madness, but the siren song of the demonette was a clear, unwavering path through the storm. She found it in a pocket of the warp that it had shaped into its own perverse paradise. A place of impossible colors that tasted like wine of music, that sculpted the air of air that smelled of forgotten memories. And at the center of it all, the demonette danced, waiting for her. It turned its head, its perfect androgynous face smiling a welcome that was more terrifying than any threat. The little seer, its voice was the melody itself, a sound that caressed her psychic senses. "You came to stop my song. Don't you like it? I wrote it just for you. For all of you." It did not attack with claws of energy or blasts of psychic force. It attacked with memory. Suddenly the warped reality dissolved, and Lyraela stood in her old workshop in the Shrine of Shaping. Before her was a block of the purest, most flawless wraithbone she had ever seen. Her old tools were in her hands. The exhilarating, intoxicating desire to create, the passion she had almost died for, washed over her with the force of a tidal wave. "Remember this feeling," the demonette's voice whispered, coiling around her. The sacred communion between the artist and the medium, the joy of bringing a perfect form into existence. Your masters taught you to fear this, to crush it. They taught you to be a machine, a replicator of dead forms. I offer you the universe as your canvas. Imagine the sculptures you could carve from the hearts of dying suns. Imagine the songs you could write with the voices of 1,000 worlds. With me, you would not be an artisan. You would be a god of creation. The temptation was an exquisite agony. But before she could formulate a defense, the scene shattered and reformed. She was on the battlefield, clad in her banshee armor, her power sword humming in her hand. The exhilarating, blood-pounding thrill of the perfect fight. The savage joy she had so brutally suppressed surged through her veins. And do you remember this? The melody sang now a triumphant war hymn. The absolute clarity of combat, the ecstasy of your body as a flawless weapon, the glorious feeling of your enemy's life yielding to your perfect strike. Your exarch taught you this was a trap. She taught you to become a ghost in your own armor. I offer you a galaxy as your arena. Feel the strength that is your birthright. Unleash the beautiful rage they forced you to chain up. With me, you would not be a mere warrior. You would be a conqueror, a Valkyrie, a true daughter of Cain, worshipped for the perfect art of your violence. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, striking not at her psychic shields, but at the foundations of her identity, at the sacrifices that had defined her entire life. The demonette let the two visions swirl around her, the artist's studio and the bloody battlefield. They are both you, Lyraela. The voice whispered now, intimate, conspiratorial. The creator and the destroyer, two sides of a passionate soul. and the path system demands you kill them both. It demands you become a grey, hollow thing, a warden in your own soul's prison. Look at your life. A series of cages, each one colder than the last. I offer you the only thing that has ever mattered. Freedom. A world with no paths. A world where every sensation, from the sculptor's caress to the warrior's killing blow, is a sacred prayer. A world where you can finally, truly be whole. The psychic melody reached a deafening crescendo. The promise of freedom, of an end to the suffocating, endless struggle, was the most powerful poison of all. Laeraela felt her discipline, the carefully constructed walls of 3 separate paths, begin to crack under the strain of that beautiful, perfect, damning lie. Laeraela's mind reeled on the psychic precipice. The demonette's temptations were perfect, each one a silver hook expertly baited with her own sacrificed dreams. The promise of freedom, of wholeness, was a song so beautiful it was nearly irresistible. Her mental shields, the disciplines of 3 paths, were groaning under the strain. To fight back with psychic force would be to answer a scream with a scream. To defend with the memory of her own duty would be to engage in a debate she was losing. The demonette wanted her to feel the rage of the warrior, the passion of the artist, the despair of the prisoner. Any emotional response, even one of defiance, would be an acknowledgement of its song, a harmonizing note that would only make the melody stronger. She was being invited to a duel where her opponent owned all the weapons, and in that moment of near surrender, a new cold clarity dawned. It was the ultimate lesson of the path, the one that underpinned all others. The enemy was not passion, but excess. The enemy was not emotion, but the loss of control. The demonette's weapon was a symphony of perfect sensation. She could not write a better symphony. She could not win by singing a different song. She had to unmake the very concept of music. The only answer to the siren's call was not a wall, but a perfect, absolute silence. Her journey, the agonizing path through cage after cage, had not just been a series of defenses. It had been an education. Now she would use it all. First, she reached for the discipline of the artisan. Not the memory of her secret, passionate creation, but the cold, hard lesson of its destruction. She recalled the mind-numbing task set by her first master Veldorian to create the sphere of stillness, an object with no meaning, no beauty, no ambition. She began to construct this concept in her mind, not of wraithbone, but of pure psychic energy. She built a thought form of a perfect void, a spiritual black hole, an idea utterly devoid of color, texture, emotion, or purpose. It was the antithesis of art. It was a statement of perfect nullity. The demonette sensed the shift in her psychic signature and redoubled its assault. The tempting visions intensified the melody, becoming a hurricane of sensation, trying to shatter her concentration before her weapon could be formed. But here she summoned the discipline of the warrior. She became the howling banshee in the heart of battle. Her mind donned the war mask not to channel rage, but to achieve the perfect cold focus that precedes the kill. The storm of temptations became mere tactical data distractions to be ignored. Her will became a sharpened blade, holding the fragile, forming concept of nothing steady against the onslaught. With the psychic construct of the void designed by the artisan and held stable by the warrior, she now had to deploy it. She called upon the quiet attunement of the technician. This was not a bomb to be thrown, but a crack to be sealed. She used the technician's precision to find the exact psychic frequency of the demonette's song. Then, with the delicate, impersonal touch of a mender, she began to project her symphony of silence not as an attack, but as a cancellation. A perfect opposing wave of absolute nullity laid precisely over the melody of absolute sensation. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. The demonette's vibrant paradise began to unravel. The impossible colors that tasted of wine bled into a flat, uniform gray. The intoxicating perfumes were replaced by the sterile non-smell of a vacuum. And the music died. It was not replaced by quiet. It was replaced by an active, crushing absence of sound that was a profound violation. The very fabric of this pocket reality woven from sensation was being unmade by the imposition of its direct opposite. For the demonette, a creature born of and sustained by the endless banquet of feeling, this was the ultimate torture. It was starvation, suffocation, and sensory deprivation combined. Its beautiful song faltered, turning into a discordant shriek of disbelief, then of pain. The encroaching void of grey nothingness was not just erasing its home, it was erasing its very reason to exist. Its perfect face twisted into a mask of pure agony. The being of sublime sensation could not endure the perfect torture of its absolute absence. With a final soul-tearing scream that had no sound, the demonette's form distended, dissolved, and was violently banished from the reality Lyraela had imposed, cast back into the deepest, darkest pits of the warp. The psychic battlefield vanished. Lyraela's consciousness snapped back into her physical body with the force of a thunderclap. She lay trembling on the floor of the dome of seers, the Farseer's minds shielding her from the aftershock. She had won. The craft world was safe from the melody of corruption, but the price of her victory was catastrophic. To create that perfect symphony of silence, to fuel that projection of absolute nothingness, she had been forced to use her own soul as the furnace. She had poured her own remaining capacity for feeling the faint, lingering embers of the artist's passion, the cold fire of the warrior's focus, the quiet satisfaction of the technician's craft into the void to give it substance. She had won the battle by becoming the ultimate expression of the path's discipline. She had saved her people from she who thirsts by becoming its perfect antithesis, a being of profound, terrifying, and absolute emptiness. A profound and chilling quiet settled over Biel-Tan. The psychic melody of the demonette was gone, its seductive frequency erased from the psychosphere of the craft world. In its place, the oppressive, rigid discipline of the path slammed back into place like a tomb door. The brief, feverish dreams of passion and perfection were over. The cold, grey reality of survival had returned. There was no celebration. There was only a quiet, grim purge. Spirit seers, their faces hidden behind impassive masks, moved through the shrines of the artisans and the warriors. They sought out those whose souls had been most touched by the corrupting song. For most, a rite of calming was performed, a psychic scouring that forcibly reset their emotional state, burying the dangerous flicker of pride or pleasure that had taken root. For the few who had truly given in, whose discipline had not just bent, but broken, there was only the quiet mercy of a spirit seer's hand, and the release of their soul into the infinity circuit, their consciousness interred with the ancestors before it could be claimed by the enemy. The sickness was cured not with healing, but with amputation. The craft world was safe. The craft world was in order. Lyraela was brought before the High Council of Biel-Tan. In the great dome of Asurion, surrounded by the Autarchs and the Farseers, she was named a hero. Farseer Liandon, his psychic voice filled with a solemn respect, recounted her journey and her ultimate victory in the face of the abyss. They spoke of her sacrifice, her unwavering will, her mastery of the disciplines that defined their people. They gave her a new title, Ashathil, the Symphony of Silence, the Shield of the Craft World. It was an honor reserved for the greatest of protectors. She stood and listened to the praise, a still, silent figure in the vast hall. She heard the words, but they were only vibrations in the air patterns of sound devoid of meaning. She saw the leaders of her people bow their heads in respect, but they were only shapes and movements. She felt nothing. Not pride, not relief. Not even the weariness of a battle hard won. The psychic furnace she had used to banish the demonette had consumed everything. She was a spectator at the ceremony of her own life. They spoke of the great danger she had faced, but she could no longer recall the fear. They spoke of the temptations she had overcome, but she no longer understood the concept of desire. They spoke of the future she had secured for them all, but she felt no hope for it. The Lyraela who had once yearned to create the Lyraela, who had learned to fight the Lyraela, who had sought peace in service, they were all gone. Their passions and pains burned away as fuel for that one perfect final act of denial. The great irony of her victory was absolute. In her desperate struggle against the ultimate embodiment of excess and sensation, she had been forced to become its perfect and equal opposite. Slaanesh was a chaotic symphony of every feeling. Lyraela was now a controlled, ordered state of none. She was no longer an Aeldari walking a path. She was the living embodiment of the path itself. She was a walking monument to the suffocating discipline that was their only salvation, their greatest strength, and their most profound tragedy. She was their hero. She was their cage. After the ceremony, she stood alone on a high balcony, looking out a crystal viewport at the endless sea of stars. The view that once would have filled an artisan's soul with wonder and a warrior's heart with defiance now elicited nothing. It was merely a configuration of light and distance. Her people were safe. She had won. And in doing so, she had been utterly and irrevocably hollowed out. The price of survival had been her soul. There was one final duty to perform. Lyraela returned to the dome of crystal seers, her psychic presence a placid, unnerving void in a place of immense power. She stood before Farsia Liandon and the council, her mind a perfectly still pool. I must relinquish the path of the seer, her thought voice, projected not with regret or sorrow, but with the simple finality of a mathematical conclusion. Liandon's own psychic presence rippled with a question that was tinged with something akin to sadness. You have wielded its power to save us all. Why would you abandon it now? To be a seer is to choose between futures, Lyraela explained, her logic cold and flawless. To choose one must have a preference. One must feel hope for one thread of fate and fear for another. I no longer possess such a filter. I can see the infinite possibilities, but I have no emotional compass to discern which is better. I can provide the data of what may be, but I can no longer feel which path is right. As a seer, I have become a flawed, unreliable instrument. My service on this path is over. The Farsirs could not argue with the truth of her statement. The very quality that had allowed her to defeat the Demonet had now disqualified her from navigating the future. With a solemn collective psychic nod, they accepted her choice. For the last time, the shimmering glyphs of the paths were presented to her. Her gaze swept over them, dismissing each one. The artisan, the warrior, the mariner, the dreamer, they all required a spark of passion, a flicker of will, a sliver of self that she no longer possessed. Her choice was for a path so obscure, so silent, that few even remembered it existed. She indicated a small, stark rune, that of a single unblinking, watchful eye. The path of the Tomb Warden. It was a life of ultimate solitude and silence. The Tomb Warden was not a spirit seer who communed with the dead. They were a guardian, a silent caretaker for the crypts where the spirit stones of the craft world's fallen exarchs were housed. The souls of exarchs, beings who had become so utterly lost on the path of the warrior, were immensely powerful and volatile even in death. Their spirits slumbered forever locked in their warrior aspect. The duty of the warden was to ensure that slumber was never ever disturbed. It was a life spent polishing the stasis runes on ancient sarcophagi, maintaining the psychic dampening fields, and providing a constant calming and utterly non-stimulating presence. The warden was a living shield against any psychic disturbance that might stir the sleeping war gods within their crystal tombs. It was a purpose that required no initiative, no passion, and no hope. It required only vigilance, patience, and a profound emptiness, She was led to her new final home, a series of deep, cold, and beautiful halls carved into the oldest part of the craft world. Here the entombed heroes of Bieltan rested in eternal silence. Lyraela walked down the rows of elegant sarcophagi, her soft footsteps the only sound. She looked upon the final resting place of Calith's predecessors, of legendary warriors whose names were still whispered with awe. She felt no reverence. She felt no sadness. She felt no fear of the immense power sleeping around her. She had found the one path that did not require a soul, only its absence. In the profound and eternal silence of the tomb, surrounded by the dead, the hero of the craft world had finally found the perfect role for the emptiness she had become. Years bled into decades and decades into centuries. Stars were born and died in the void outside, and generations of Aeldari lived their disciplined lives and joined the great chorus of the Infinity Circuit. Through it all, Lyraela remained a constant silent presence in the heart of the craft world's tombs. She became a legend, a ghost story whispered among the Spirit Seers, the Silent Warden, the Ashathil, the ultimate symbol of their race's grim bargain. She performed her duties with flawless mechanical perfection, her presence a blanket of absolute calm that soothed the slumbering warrior souls in her care. She had achieved perfect discipline. She had achieved perfect safety. She existed, but she no longer lived. She was kneeling in her meditative stance in the central chamber of the crypt, a motionless figure of white and grey amidst the silent, sleeping dead. The silence in the tomb was her masterpiece, a constructed and actively maintained nullity, the most psychically sterile place on the entire craft world. It was the final perfect cage. Here no passion could stir, no pride could bloom, no whisper from the abyss could possibly enter. But the abyss is patient. From the deepest, most forgotten corner of her hollowed-out soul, from a place she believed had been scoured clean by psychic fire, she felt a flicker. It was not a thought. It was not a memory. It was the faintest, most impossibly distant impression of a sound, a single silvery note of mirth, a soft, knowing, and utterly patient chuckle. She did not react. Her body remained perfectly still, her face an impassive mask. But her consciousness, the tiny observing spark that was all that remained of her, recognized it. It was she who thirsts, the great enemy, the eternal patient hunger. Her victory had not been a final banishment. It had merely been a temporary setback. The Prince of Pleasure could afford to wait. It was always there on the other side of the veil, its gaze fixed upon their souls. It could wait millennia for a single hairline crack in the great wall of their discipline, for a single moment of weakness from a single soul. The war was not over. The war would never be over. Lyraela, the symphony of silence, remained kneeling in the tomb. Her duty was unchanged, but its nature was now infinitely more terrible. She was the eternal warden, a jailer, not only for the dead warriors around her, but for the endless mocking whisper that now resided in the vast silence of her own mind. Her discipline was their only shield. Their discipline was their only prison. And the sentence was forever.